The Pursuit of Happyness is a film adapted from the true story of a businessman named Chris Gardner. This film tells about the struggle of Chris from the beginning until he became the successful businessman as he is known today. Are you curious on how the story goes? The following is a summary of the film The Pursuit of Happyness. At the beginning of this film, there was a man named Chris Gardner. Christopher worked as a salesperson for bone density scanners in his city. This tool can help scan and see the disease contained in a person's body. But at that time there was little interest in this tool. In the end, Chris tried to sell the device to the doctor in a door-to-door method. Christopher lived with his son Christopher Jr. and his wife Linda. Because he couldn't earn any money, Linda tried to help her husband by working as a factory worker. At that time, Chris's family life was quite complicated because they were always stricken with grief. Not only did he fail to sell just one item a month, but he also lost his car due to a ticket and unpaid arrears. One day, when Chris wanted to sell the scanner, he saw a man driving a luxury car and he asked what the man was doing in his life, and the man replied that he was a stockbroker. At that time, Christopher was interested in becoming a stockbroker like that man. The next morning he told his wife that after work he would go to a firm and become a stockbroker. This idea sounded unreasonable to Linda. And sure enough, after coming home from work, Christopher immediately visited one of the closest firms. Because he was not allowed to bring the scanner inside, Christopher entrusted it to a busker outside the office. A moment later, Christopher came in and met a man named Tim Brophy, a human resources employee who handled Christopher. After that, he also gave the man an internship form and asked Christopher to meet a man named Jay Twistle in the main office. At the same time, it turned out that the busker had taken the scanner away and Chris had to get out to chase her. But unfortunately, Chris lost track of the woman and lost the scanner. The next day, Christopher returned with another scanner and intended to sell it as usual, but this time he stopped by the office to give the form to a man named Mr. Twistle. However, Mr. Twistle looked busy. He promised to contact Christopher at another time. After that, Christopher called one of his prospective clients who would buy the scanner. At the same time, Christopher saw another person who brought his scanner which had been stolen and then chased him. Finally, Christopher managed to reclaim the object from the busker he met a few days ago. Previously, Christopher and Linda spent all their savings to buy the scanner and decided to become the only scanner distributor in the city. They thought it would sell well, but unfortunately Christopher couldn't even sell one in a month. This is because the price was quite expensive. Moving on to the next scene, after a month, Chris finally met with Mr. Twistle and wanted to inquire about the continuation of his internship form. But Mr. Twistle, who looked very busy, didn't have time to serve Christopher because he had to go to a place called Noe Valley. Christopher, that never run out of ideas, also says that he also wants to go there and offers to share a vehicle with Mr. Twistle. On the way, Mr. Twistle still didn't want to serve Christopher and was busy with his Rubik's Cube. However, Christopher had the courage to solve the game, even though Christopher had not found any signs that Mr. Twistle will recruit him. On the same day, Christopher called Linda and said that he would be home late that night. Unexpectedly, Linda, who could not stand living with Christopher, said that she would go and bring their child. Hearing this, Christopher immediately went home and saw that the house was empty. His wife and child had left him that night. But unexpectedly, suddenly Twistle called Christopher and asked him to come for an interview. It turned out Twistle was amazed to see Christopher struggle when trying to solve the Rubik's Cube. The next day, Christopher met with Linda and an argument ensued between them. Linda felt Chris has burdened them all this time and wants to leave him. Hearing this, Christopher, who was angry, finally let Linda go as long as his son lived with him. After arguing with Linda, Christopher goes to Christopher's school and picks up his son. Ever since then, Christopher in the end lived with his father. Chris's problem didn't stop there. He just got home from work. The owner of the house came asking Christopher to move tomorrow because he didn't pay the rent and wanted to paint the house, but Christopher promised to pay it. After learning that his son was also there, he gave him a week and said that Chris should paint the house himself. While painting the house, suddenly the police came to pick up Christopher because he had not paid the ticket fine. Christopher had to be detained for one night, even though tomorrow morning he had to do an interview. The next morning, with a very messy appearance, his face still covered in paint and without a shirt, Christopher ventured into the office for an interview. He immediately met the company officials with his face still covered with paint. Christopher told them what he had been through. He also shared his qualities, hoping they would accept Christopher. After the interview was over, Christopher promised to contact Twistle. Twistle didn't even know what the man meant. It turned out that at the time of the interview, Christopher realized that during his internship he would not get a salary. Hearing this, Twistle promised to change his position. This situation made Christopher worried because this opportunity would not be repeated a second time, but at the same time he also had to work in order to survive. In the end, he had to divide his time between work and internship. To reduce expenses, Chris took his son to move to a motel with a much cheaper rent. On the first day of the internship, one of the supervisors gave them a book to study. He also gave a challenge, namely that the interns had to bring in one investor. Christopher tried to approach anyone he knew on the streets, old friends, schoolmates and so on, but instead of getting clients, Christopher gets hit. The next day, Chris called again one of the prospective clients and asked him to meet. The man who was there agreed and asked Chris to come as soon as possible. But when Christopher was about to leave, one of his bosses asked Christopher to park his car. Eventually Christopher missed the opportunity to meet the potential investor. One morning on his way to work, Christopher passed a prospective client's house that he had not yet had the chance to meet. He then decided to stop and went to the man's house. On the way, Christopher Jr. asked his father if they were going to watch a football game, but his father didn't promise because he would be busy with work. After meeting the prospective stockbroker, Christopher just found out that they were going to see the game with his son, so the man finally brought Christopher and Christopher Jr. with them. During the game, Chris offered the man to become a stockbroker at the company where he had an apprenticeship, but unfortunately at that time the man was not interested in becoming a stockbroker at their place. Moving on to the next scene, Chris's life, which had started to improve, was again hit by a disaster. The remaining $600 in his bank savings were forcibly taken by the tax authorities without informing him beforehand. To survive, he returned to the hospital to offer a scanner to one of the doctors, but unfortunately the device was damaged and the doctor could not buy it. When returning to the motel, Christopher saw all their belongings had been put outside because Christopher was late in paying the rent. That night, Chris finally brought his son to the station. To distract Christopher said that the tool he carried was a time machine. When Christopher presses the button, they will return to the age of dinosaurs. At the same time, they act as if they were in that era. Christopher took his son to hide in the toilet and they slept there. Christopher uses toilet paper as his son's bed. He even has to stay up all night so that no one knows where they are in the toilet. The next day, Chris looked for a place to stay for his son, but the woman he met said that they did not accept male guests and asked Chris to go to a shelter. Arriving at the shelter, Christopher had to compete with dozens of other homeless. Fortunately, Christopher managed to get a bed, even though before he had to fight with men who tried to overtake him in the queue. While Christopher Jr. was asleep, Christopher tried to repair the scanner, and the next day he returned to the hospital to sell the device. Eventually the device worked as intended and he got his money back. Since then, Christopher has started to get used to it. Apart from work and internships, occasionally he also took Christopher to the beach where he is far from people, only him and his son. After 6 months of internship, Christopher finally got one stockbroker. After that, he also underwent an exam as a condition for permanent employees at the company. After that, he returned to conduct interviews with company officials, and thanks to his efforts and hard work, Chris finally got to officially work at that place. At the end of the film, Chris is seen crying happily while walking out of the company building and joining the passers-by. Chris immediately met his son, then hugged him tightly. The film closes by showing Chris and Christopher spending time together. At the end of the film, it is also said that after starting his career at Dean Witter, Chris Gardner founded his own firm in 1987. Then in 2006, Chris sold a minority stake in his brokerage firm in a multi-million-dollar deal. That's the plot of The Pursuit of Happyness. Thank you for watching this video up until the end, and we will see you in the next video.